Let's start with Quentin. Would you tell us a little bit about what brings you to the stage, sir?
Sure. Hopefully my voice survives. So I guess I spent the first half of my career working on embedded systems and weapons platforms. I got into building machine learning systems shortly after that. And so I guess the journey towards OpenStack was about the infrastructure not supporting the kind of applications we needed to build. And so, as an engineer, you go where the problems are. And so there's been a journey from building machine learning systems, butting up against the infrastructure, not getting what we needed. And so spending a lot of time diving down into the infrastructure, rebuilding back up, and now hopefully at the stage where we're more productive on delivering those kinds of systems. So that's the journey largely for me.
Hi, I'm Sarah. My journey's quite different from everyone here. So I'm an ex-neuroscience researcher, moved into project management, and when I moved to Australia, got a job in IT. So I'm still fairly new to this world. I've only been working in IT for about 6 years. Currently, I sort of manage more of a business manager for the research data storage service at University of Melbourne, and have some team members at Monash. Worked with Tom and some other folks who you would have heard talks from about delivering the first research cloud through Nectar funding, so kind of involved in that space. But what I guess I'm more here to talk about is how to increase diversity in IT. So I'm happy to field any questions on that later on.
I'm Roland. I'm the CEO of Aptira. I don't come from a long heritage of cloud experience. I spent a long time working at telcos where cloud was simply not a thing until relatively recently. But I started working for Tristan 4 years ago, something like that, and working with all of our customers to build OpenStack-based solutions.
I'm Tom. I work for the OpenStack Foundation, and I cut my teeth doing infrastructure for experimental particle physics before falling into the cloud space. Did some work on Amazon with physics, and then ended up building a cloud for the publicly funded research sector. Now I'm wrangling very interesting questions, essentially anything to do with users and OpenStack for the foundation.
So Sarah, I want to start with you, ask you a little bit about what is changing for you, kind of around you, maybe what you'd like to see changed. And folks, then I'm very soon going to be looking to you for a question, so please prepare them so we have no awkwardness. All right, cool.
So I guess in my day-to-day job, my team, it does more customer service, and we deal with actual researchers rather than, we have lots of links to the DevOps team, but what we're really seeing is the gaining of trust of the research community to use these centralized systems, apps, infrastructure, rather than relying on old school versions to keep their data to themselves. It takes quite a bit for an early career researcher to give you their data. That's their livelihood. So we're seeing that increase, and we're actually seeing a lot of research domains that we hadn't expected to want to get into the cloud space, get their hands dirty, and get a bit more technical, and that's really great to see. So I'm hoping we can continue that momentum, really, and grow that customer base.
Quentin, what's changing for your team in the business line?
So I think for us, the focus continues to remain, you've got to do more faster for less, safer and more highly available. So it's always just year on year, it's more and more. So our internal user base and our general scaling factors, so demand grows by 60% year on year, and our costs can't grow by 60% year on year. So that's a continuous challenge. I think there's been lots of discussion this morning around the focus kind of moves from traditional cloud to kind of second generation of cloud, and there's lots of options in that space still, and it's not clear who's going to win or who should line up behind and what's useful and what's not. And so I think all of these represent really interesting engineering challenges, cost, speed, and choosing the right tool for the right job for you given your constraints. And so I see another good 3 years of this level of engineering discussion taking place before we start to land on common solutions.
Tom, what's changing in the community or for the foundation?
Well, absolutely. It's pretty interesting time in OpenStack because we've gone well past that stage where the organizations that we're discovering on a day-to-day basis are no longer the ones with the massive IT departments or the ones that you consider the leading edge. We're now getting into the stage where much more risk-averse industries like banking are getting heavily into deploying this stuff, and it's just really exciting to see OpenStack happening across every kind of industry that you wouldn't expect.
Roland, talk about your changes.
I think following on from Tom's point, we're starting to see a level of trust in OpenStack that allows it to be packaged as part of a larger business solution. So we're able to, we're able to package as part of a larger solution, but we're also sort of benefiting from it not being this weird new thing that is going to scare people off. So we're seeing a level of maturity, I think, in the product, as it were, and also out there in customer land, people have a little more trust and are able to accept it as just another solution component.
Okay, I'm looking to you. Where will our conversation go next? We have a question here.
One of the things that I've personally struggled with over the years, because I've done a lot of medical research, is whenever I use cloud infrastructure, there is a challenge to where your data lives. Privacy Acts in Australia prevent you from storing your data typically outside your state, often outside your institution. I mean, it was a real barrier to the RDS program. It basically killed them for medical research. The really great thing for me, I actually use OpenStack for our HPC system, and it's good because it's on my site. I mean, are you seeing other more data-sensitive industries moving in towards OpenStack because they can't do public cloud?
Anyone can grab that?
Absolutely, yes. So the really cool thing about OpenStack being a platform that anyone can take to build a cloud purpose-built for their particular case study is people are using it for exactly that. With regard to data sovereignty and movement across borders, we're seeing a lot of uptake of, I guess you call them niche public cloud players in Europe. And in fact, there's a cloud provider based out of Sweden, City Network or City Cloud, who's set up a cloud dedicated for the insurance industry. So when we were in Boston at the most recent OpenStack summit, we got together anyone who's interested in compliance and these kind of issues together in a room, and we managed to fill a room with completely packed full of people who are interested in this, and some of them are actively solving these issues. So yeah, I think it's becoming one of the driving use cases for those industries. I don't know if that answered the question, though. It's been a long day.
I'm looking for another hand up, and you're welcome to add, Sarah,
Just
please.
to add on to that, wearing my day hat on. So the storage that we built at Melbourne University and at Monash University is purely housed here in Melbourne, and in Australia it doesn't leave Victoria. It's got everything, but all of our data centers are here, so if you are looking for some storage solutions, we can help you. Purely for that reason is we know there's a lot of ethics constraints around medical data, and we've got quite a few experts working on that to make sure that we can meet your needs. So happy to talk to you after this if you need.
And there are a small number and probably a growing number of service providers in Australia who are focusing on people who have very stringent data storage requirements, mostly government focused, so they all have to comply with the Defence Department regulations on that stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of activity in that space, both, as Tom said, internationally and here locally.
Another question? I will bring the mic to you. Thank you.
One of the things I've seen seems to challenge a lot of organizations is upgrading. And I was wondering if anyone on the panel has views from that, from any angle, just as a general thing, keeping pace.
Yeah, it historically has been extremely difficult. to the extent that there are a number of different high-level approaches to upgrading from, fairly explosive ones that involve, bombing and stuff back to the Stone Age and rebuilding it through to trying to do gradual upgrades. I'm not technical enough to be across what the latest state of play is in terms of the upgrade cycle, but I do believe it's improved. I think Tom can probably talk a lot more about that than I can.
Yeah, so it varies a little bit depending on which particular component of OpenStack you're talking about. If you look at Swift object storage, for example, that's been fairly painless to upgrade from the very beginning. But what a lot of people care about is the Nova component, the compute components. And if you're lucky enough to be running a version that's from the Liberty release onwards, they've put in a lot of interesting migrations in the database that make that much more painless. They've also put in versioning in terms of how OpenStack compute talks within itself. So you can do things like have your control plane running a more recent version of OpenStack than individual compute nodes. And you can actually mix different versions together and they'll fall back to their lowest common denominator for communication. So if you're running a release before Liberty, you're going to have a bad time. After Liberty, it gets increasingly better. And these days, it's in a pretty good situation with everything. I'm going to say that the networking is still not where we want it to be.
So one thing I heard frequently was that people were no longer just running a part of their overall cloud infrastructure in OpenStack, but they'd really kind of gone into the legacy applications. They weren't just running new stuff, but we were seeing a lot of legacy applications. I have a question over here, and then maybe we can talk a little more about that.
Thank you. This may have been covered, but I'm just asking, in Nextcloud, there's a concept called federation, where you could send things across different platforms, your organizations or your partners or things like that. Is there such a thing here on OpenStack?
Yes. So there's one of the problems with talking about federation is that there are many different kinds of federation aspects that people have in their mind. So if you look, for instance, at the Nectar cloud here in Australia, they have 10 different organizations hosting data centers, and they're actually providing a single API endpoint for researchers to get through to all of those. So that's a kind of federation. There's also the kind of federation like an identity and access federation, and so the identity and access component of OpenStack does have some ability there to plug in with those kind of things. In recent releases of OpenStack, there was the ability added for the identity and access component, Keystone, to talk with another instance of that deployment. So it's possible to do things like share credentials and yeah, there's a lot going on in that space. There's an entire working group devoted into sharing things between clouds, but there are definitely some things you can do today, and there'll be an even more exciting range of things you can do in the future.
Other thoughts on that? Panelists? All right, I'm looking for the hand in the air. I'm walking over here. I feel a question coming on. No? Okay, well, one of the things I want the panelists to be thinking about is not only what's changing now for them, but also what we could expect to be talking about in the future. This year, just this last month ago at the OpenStack Summit in Boston, we were talking a lot about edge computing. A year prior, we were talking a lot about containers. Maybe 6 months ago, we were talking a lot about networking functions virtualization. So I'm really curious, panelists, to each of you, would you talk a little bit about what you think we're going to be talking about maybe in 6 months or a year from now? What will be kind of the new hot topics for OpenStack as a community and OpenStack as a technology? Who wants to bite off and chew that one?
Hopefully upgrades. Sorry. So just back on the upgrade question, actually doing upgrades is quite hard, and I think there's lots of fundamental things that preclude us doing it as a community, and it's pretty true of a lot of communities. But if you're not upgrading daily or weekly, you've lost the battle, right? At the moment, you're doing it monthly or 6 monthly, you'll just fall behind in any practical sense, and you won't catch up again. And then you'll add another one. That one will fall behind, and you'll add another one, and you never come back and shut down any of the old ones. That's just how commercial realities play out. So I think a heavy focus on continuous delivery at all layers. And if we don't do that, we're like practically that graph of who's running which version will just look worse and worse over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think we need to. What I'd like to see is to see that level of sort of cultural change show up in more widely. We're kind of in an early adopter stage where I think people with that kind of attitude is starting to permeate into enterprise and older, sort of larger organisations. It'd be great in a year if we had a much more diverse, in terms of industries, much more diverse group of users who are at least starting to undertake that cultural journey.
Next. Yeah, no, sorry. I guess as more and more people get used to using open source and a lot of the open source tools and apps, it'd be really cool to see, from a researcher point of view, some really new and intuitive ways to actually visualize and share. I think at the moment that's still kind of building slowly, and as more people get more technical and have more experience with the space, it'd be really cool to see where that area goes.
I'm good. I've spoken enough. There's a question.
Give me one. I'll run it back. Who has the question? Try again. Okay, great.
As an aside to the upgrading piece, in a relatedly unrelated fashion, part of the problem I've seen is not so much the core projects, but vendors that are choosing to implement the OpenStack not keeping up. And I was wondering if from the foundation side, there is interest or a lack of interest in trying to, in some way, kind of certify or regulate that, or whether that's really being left as just, it's up to you choosing a product to get that from the vendor yourself, and you don't want to push on that officially, or perhaps getting things pushed in upstream rather than maintained out of tree.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a desire within the community to ensure that projects that aren't playing nicely and aren't alive and becoming perhaps zombie projects do get pushed out of the big tent, as it were, if you're familiar with that terminology. But basically the project kind of gets, just not included anymore. It's no longer an OpenStack project. So I think there's definitely a desire to enforce and encourage good behaviours from projects so that kind of stuff doesn't happen, where one is not updated, misses a release and becomes unusable. Yeah.
I guess specifically to address the vendor point, one of the interesting privileges we have of being an open source community is we have the ability to tie back feedback from people who are using all different vendors' products and aggregate that at a higher level, which is kind of interesting. And certainly I think we are getting to the stage where, as Roland said, we are hearing that feedback. People wish that their particular product from their particular vendor was available at a newer version, and they want what they can see being talked about in the keynotes at the summit and that kind of thing. So, the foundation obviously doesn't control what the vendors do, but what we can do is surface that information and make it widely available, and hope that the customer voice wins through at the end of the day.
I'm coming to you with the mic.
So a quick question. How many more years of active development do you think there is in OpenStack before we reach a peak?
6.
That was so authoritative. I love it. I'm going to give y'all that.
I don't know. I think ideally, if you want to look at it from an OpenStack perspective, ideally it doesn't stop. The question, I suppose, is can we get to a point where, much like a tree, here we go, metaphor time, much like a tree expands, like the core can stay fairly steady. We're certainly not there yet. How long till we get there? Yeah, I don't know. Not as long as it was last year, hopefully.
I think there's kind of top-down from a workload point of view. You've got things under the banner of AI, which personally I don't like the term, but under that banner, so deep learning and associated things, where there's lots of topographical, interesting things that you can do from the infrastructure and from the cloud that hasn't been done yet. I think it's going to drive a lot of change in this space. And I think there's lots of interesting things being pushed from Intel, NVIDIA, and other places on the networking and the actual computation side of things. So I think bringing those through, you're going to get lots of point specialized clouds to deal with that sort of stuff, and it'll start to filter back down. So I think all of the basic things will be, getting into a nice stable state in the next 2 to 3 years, but I think we'll start to focus more in those areas, and I don't see it slowing down 6 years or beyond.
So I guess one of the promises of OpenStack is that it is this integration engine. The idea being that if a new technology comes along, you rip out that bit that you don't want anymore and you slot the new bit in. And so we're seeing this today with OpenStack and containers, for instance. So a lot of the new developers coming into OpenStack are interested in containers. And that's driving more developers to come to OpenStack. And so if we keep finding that new technology and ripping out an old bit and putting in the new bit, it should sustain for quite some time. The other interesting thing about open source projects of this scale, and there's some research available here that my colleague Thierry Carrez pointed me to, is there's not just one peak, there's actually 3 different peaks in terms of developers in an open source community. You've got the in terms of number of developers provided by various sources. So you've got the peak from the startups that come in, you've got the peaks from the vendors that come in, and then there's a third peak that a lot of people miss, which is the users of the project start contributing back in a later stage. And those peaks aren't just to the same level, they tend to grow on each other and they keep going. And with OpenStack bringing in new technologies, it might start up another startup peak and another vendor peak for each technology. So it's got legs for some time to come.
Another question right here.
At the Boston Summit, I attended some of the forum sessions, and the Glance one in particular, some of the core developers indicated that, well, one of them wasn't employed to work on Glance, and they seemed a little bit understaffed. Do you think this is a problem, or do you think it could become a problem for some of the projects that maybe aren't sexy?
Yes, I think it could be a problem. There's been a lot, as you'd know, there's been a lot of angst recently about layoffs happening in various large OpenStack providers. I'm not sure whether the problem is necessarily the sexy project. It's possibly the sexy project that needs to go to that next level of maturity. And if it's not able to attract people through hype and it doesn't have a strong sort of commercial level of support, then that project may not make the transition to something that becomes more stable. Whereas I think so long as we have people who are making money out of selling OpenStack products, we'll have people maintaining Nova and Neutron and whatever. So yeah, I think maybe it's less about not getting sexy things, because people will always say, oh, I want to try the new latest and greatest thing. Is can the latest and greatest thing make the transition to stability?
Other thoughts on that one? All right, I think we can maybe do 1 or 2 more questions. Ooh, dangerous question in the front here.
Yeah. So y'all, in talking about the users, yes, I've been infected by Austin. I apologize. So the question is, you all have users, right? And users are important. So what is the thing that is actually attracting users? And I want to get really simple here. How do you actually get real users to not only come along and use the thing, but, and this is kind of the follow-up question, how do you get them to then participate? So whether it's universities or governments or telcos or all the rest of it, how do you attract those people back into the community to kind of go towards this third peak? And what are some of the arguments from your communities and your users you're actually seeing?
It's a slightly layered answer from me. The OpenStack users in our space are systems engineers and sysadmins. And those users build container clusters, and the users of the containers clusters are running other clusters, and then there's users. So it's kind of 4 layers buried below. So I think keeping people keen on it is more about understanding, what are you using the thing for? And in my case, the community is systems engineers. And I've been talking to lots of people around the floor here today, kind of pointing out some of the challenges we have is just finding, attracting, retaining what is a big gap in the market right now from a skills point of view, which is systems engineering. It's this weird point where you've got some Linux skills, some sysadmin skills, some software engineering skills. Typically people push into the analytics space or into the software app building space, and not many people want to stay in the platform space. So I don't feel like it's a solved problem. We've got various initiatives running with universities. We're trying various options around training. We're continuously evolving the hiring process. But for some reason, industry seems to focus on the higher level sexy things and not these things, which I think are the more core important ones. And so I think there's actually a real gap there. And I don't think it's a solved problem yet. If you've got a solution, come talk to me.
For us, our biggest thing is customer service. We try and have lots of one-on-one interactions with our user base, try and understand what they actually need and what they do on their day-to-day lives at work, throughout whatever collaborations they have, and that's really important for us to be able to build the right solution for them, to actually, I guess, recommend what they should be using, how they should use it, what training they need to get on board our services. So it's really about us taking the time to understand who they are, what they need, and what's important to them.
I think for us our customers, users, what we need to do with them is to give them the ability to focus on whatever it is that they do without getting too caught up in what's actually happening under the hood. Get a network engineer to have the tools to deploy some arbitrarily complex network topology in a way that they understand without having to learn all this wonderful new stuff.
Last question, last chance. I feel like an auctioneer. Okay, well, I want to thank, first of all, please help me. Oh, wait, what? That's like going once, going twice, and then he gets his bid in. Here you are, David.
Yeah, sorry about the beers. I got the impression from the user survey that there's going to be organizations, users that aren't going to converge 100% on OpenStack or on AWS, and they'll find an optimum spread between those offerings. And do you think there's going to be a point, either a level where they accept or a degree where those, the AWSs and Microsofts of the world will say, okay, we accept that we've reached, the maximum market appeal we can have in whatever vertical or industry, and we'll sit down and collaborate with you and make, our technology work with OpenStack, whatever it might be. Do you think they'll ever engage in that, either in standards processes or whatever the rough edges might be, or they'll just have too much fear of churn and they'll never engage in kind of interoperability processes?
No. To be frank, no, I don't think so. I think that's a space in the market that's going to be solved by, people who are making orchestration, workload control software. Well, yeah, I think with both Microsoft and AWS for different reasons. Microsoft is coming into the private cloud market slowly, and AWS just wants to crush. So, yeah. I don't think the idea of a standards-based, a standards body for cloud APIs is ever going to happen. No.
It's funny to see the 3 strategies from kind of Google, Microsoft, and AWS in this space. AWS's definition of hybrid cloud is you bring all the new stuff to us and you leave all the old stuff in your data center. Microsoft is one of the other partners that we work with will bring Azure into your data center, and Google's like, hey, here's Kubernetes, right? So we've got all these, they're essentially going, what you run inside Google Cloud, you can run in your own data center. And they're three pretty distinct strategies from those people, from those providers. And I think you'll see they become important strategies for large organizations in terms of them choosing to partner with one of those service providers. I think there is some evidence, certainly in the container space, of standardization, OCI and related. There's also a lot of industry forums, cloud advisory forums, which those them plus Intel run to try and get advisory and try and align, at least on a outcomes perspective. So I don't think it's impossible, but I think there's still a big gap to come around what hybrid actually means and which one of those strategies actually wins out in the overall economics.
So I'm a pragmatist, and I think in engineering, what you need to do is look at your workloads and work out which cloud works best for you. And if that's AWS plus an OpenStack private cloud, fantastic. If it's not OpenStack at all, and that's the best decision, that's good. It's what you've got to do when you're an engineer. But we are very fortunate in the OpenStack community that we do actually already have collaborations with these folks. So Microsoft provides resources to make sure OpenStack works on Hyper-V. That's fantastic. Google is providing resources to integrate OpenStack with Kubernetes. So we've got kind of 1.5 ticks from the 3, which is good. Will there be one cloud standard API? Well, in theory, there's already a cloud standard API if you look at the OCCI work or the CDMI work. And when we put those into OpenStack and made them available for users, no one took them up. And the reason for that is, in order to have a successful platform, you need to have not just the awesome technology, not just the users, but also that innovative ecosystem around it. It's about the tools that are built on that API, and there's a number of different tools for the AWS or Google or Microsoft ecosystem. There's a number of different tools for OpenStack, and if you're to have one cloud standard, you'd have to rewrite all of the tools to use that, and that's the real kicker, I guess. But anyway, I think, Heidi, we were supposed to talk about diversity, and we haven't done that yet.
Yes, thank you, Tom. I want to ask this question before we wrap up, which is we're frequently talking about trying to expand or include within our community. And by expand and include, by the word diversity, I don't just mean gender diversity, for example, but maybe a greater emphasis on young and new developers, or a greater emphasis on bringing in more diverse industries as users. I'd like to hear from each of you on what you think that we could do differently in the coming year, for example, to expand our community in a positive way.
I'll start that one off. I think the thing that everyone should probably also remember is, like you said, diversity is not gender. We've got quite a lot of different backgrounds, and I mean that in education, your career path, your cultural background, your age. That's a huge one. So for my team specifically, I think we're really successful because we have a range of people from mid-20s to early 60s. We have 3 people that immigrated to Australia. We have people that came from a wide range of backgrounds. I'm a neuroscience. I studied neuroscience. We have people that have degrees in art history and in business analysis. So it's bringing all those different perspectives in and understanding that people do want to change their career later on in life. So bringing in those new developers that have a totally different background, but that can bring in some really great ideas, because ultimately our customers are super diverse. We don't just have one type of customer, and if we want to actually meet all of their needs, we have to be diverse to stay on top of that. So.
But what should we do to help change our community makeup in a positive way?
the recruitment's a big one. Try and be a bit more open and understanding that there is always going to be the learning curve. So having a slightly larger learning curve when you hire someone isn't a bad thing. Ultimately, sometimes that does take more time out of your team, but if you have to train someone up, you're training them how you want them to work for you, and you don't have to erase bad habits that another company has put into a staff member. So I think it's increasing the pipeline of people looking into the industry, but being open to people that want to change their career paths. And it is a bit hard when you have a lot of technical skills that you require, but being open to internships and people just learning on the job and volunteer work, I think is the start. So,
Roland, what's Aptira doing?
So, I mean, my view on diversity is that it's all very well to you know, write a diversity policy and have a nice, friendly organisation, but fundamentally, you actually have to actively recruit a diverse population. So I think really the key to, and it's not strictly something that the community can do, but in reality, the community is made up of a bunch of employers who are hiring people who are doing things in the community. And I think it's important for those employers to, you know, put the money where their mouths are and hire people from diverse backgrounds, not just have a nice policy that says to, you know, be nice to each other. You actually have to actively recruit a diverse population of employees, otherwise you will not change.
Quentin, are you actively doing anything to encourage diverse candidates?
I'm lucky to work for an organisation that's focused on diversity for a long time. It does have a nice policy and friendly people and all that, but I think like top-down evidence outside of the IT portions of it, I mean, half the board is female, right? And it's, I think it's half today. So there's real evidence. You look at all the senior management structures in the business, there is genuine evidence of diversity, and it's been a top-level agenda for some time, and I think the group's done really well at it. It's still not the case on the ground inside IT or highly technical fields. And, you know, given the nature of this conference being a highly technical one, from my point of view, it feels very much like a bootstrapping problem. In what I mean by that is, until you've got a certain amount of people of a particular of a particular gender or group, you can't attract more into the field. There's like a minimum amount that you need to have. You've got to have, I don't know, 10, 15% of your workforce being female before you start attracting more females, because it's somehow there's a exclusionary, with these extreme ratios, there's a natural exclusionary aspect to it. Bootstrapping, therefore, for me is more about getting involved on the university side than it is, like the hiring process is already, there's a strong gear towards when there's an opportunity to move the dial from a diversity point of view, you do it and you adjust the hiring process. But that's still not going to solve the problem. So I think for me it's more about focusing at the university level.
Pipeline. I think I'm out of, oh, I got batteries. You want to add anything left?
No, just
as our community manager?
Sure. The foundation is obviously very, very much in favour of doing anything it possibly can to further diversity, and there's some initiatives that anyone can be involved in as well. We have the group Women of OpenStack. If you're anyone from any background, any gender, who's interested in furthering the cause of women in technology, I'd encourage you to join that group. We run a travel support program to get people from countries that may not be able to afford the ticket. We actively try and do cultural education, bringing together developers of different backgrounds. We run mentoring programs of several different kinds. So if you're interested in this area, please do get in touch. We've got lots of room for help, and we can hopefully grow together.
Yeah. And I personally love the internationalization project for further helping us spread the global word of OpenStack. Okay, well, please join me in thanking our panelists.